rights and women rights and other human groups' rights originally. That women had no capacity for higher thought or emotion.
Yes, they certainly were.
Yeah.
And you're actually, unknowingly, you're foreshadowing next week's reading. We're going to read this guy named Tom Birch next week. We're going to spend a whole week, 2 whole classes just on his essay. It's a little bit longer essay. But he points out that the project of seeking moral status is itself an imperial project. And that, so this whole project, according to, including what Rolston, beyond this, the whole project of assigning a special moral status to various entities in the natural world is an imperial project in the sense that it involves demarcating that which is somehow special or sacred, perhaps, which is always not very much, right? Demarcating that from everything else, which is then open for exploitation. Think of our the designation wilderness. Less than 3% of North America has that status. Okay, so you might ask, the skeptic might wonder, well, how, what's going on here with these environmentalists? They're only managed to protect 3%. What about all the rest? Well, all the rest now seems to be just a sacrifice zone. Perhaps, if it's not wilderness, then does that mean it's open for business, everything, right? And so there's this sense in which, there's something artificial about this whole project of trying to assign moral status to certain entities, right? And what Tom Birch says is that, in fact, the only way to approach life and natural resources is to start with the presupposition that everything has moral status. Everything. And that, in fact, one hallmark of being human is to experience a deontic feature in everything. There's a deontic feature in every aspect of experience, according to Thomas Birch. And so, in some cases, for example, even a rock might have moral status. Depending, right? And our inclination is to seek that out, which is kind of cool. It's another way of celebrating humanity by these environmental ethicists. If you stop and think about what some of them are saying, you're realizing that, wow, they're attributing these almost miraculous powers to human beings. And that's kind of cool, and maybe we do have something like that. If we can, right? We're the only animal that we know of in the universe that can recognize moral status in a rock. Because, for example, that rock contains a certain super special tiny ecosystem, right? Then, or as in the example that Tom Birch uses, because, he uses the example of rock climbing, and in his experience of rock climbing, the rock had moral status, because, anyway, I'll leave that to you to read that. But my example is the little rock that's in the fumarole at the edge of Lake Superior. There are these little, it's all kind of old volcanic activity and all around Lake Superior. And there are these little bubbles of gas that come up. They're called fumaroles. Anyway, and they have their own little ecosystems. All these little bugs and stuff live in there. And in that one instance, when we were walking, along the edge there, and our guide was showing us the fumarole, I realized, I could pick up that rock and maybe look on the other side, and maybe it's a little bit discolored from the various minerals that are coming up right there. But I would have to put the rock back, right? Because I realized, right? And if I didn't know that, though, then I wouldn't have, right? I wouldn't have a moral obligation. So anyway, Tom Birch says that the experience of moral obligation is a hallmark of human experience per se. It's a hallmark of just thinking. We can't think without seeking out and identifying some kind. And deontic experience, by the way, isn't a sense of duty. That would be a mistake. A wrong way of thinking. It's a sense that, right, you might say, what's the difference? But it's a sense that there's something you must do, right? You must act, right? In this case, you can't just fling the rock over there. You have to put it right back where it was because some bug or some little critter was relying on it where it was before, right? So anyway, all of this stuff, right? Maybe I'm just kind of trying to look ahead to where we're going. Okay, some of you are getting a little frustrated. Don't think that this is, our goal. This is only one stop along the way for us. All right. So, Regan does have these principles that we can bring to bear, and they should remind you, who else, what other thinker came up with these principles and he called them second order principles? Who was that? Name? Come on. Be on top of it, on top of everything. What, did you all sleep through all the whole thing? Remember that SOP 1 and SOP 2 and all that? And I had to stop and say, well, what's the first order principle, right? These are the second order principles. Why do authors come up with principles like that? Because they feel challenged to defend the claim that they're making. In this case, Regan, right? In that case, it's Collicutt. I was asking you to blurt out the name Collicutt. And you all could have, but you're too shy. But anyway, Collicutt felt obligated to offer his readers principles like that, some kind of principles like that, because Collicutt felt obligated to deflect the criticism that if all we have is a principle that demands that we do what's right for the ecosystem, then we might end up having to violate other existing obligations. And so what we need are some kind of mediation principles, right? And one example we've seen with Collicutt's 2 second-order principles, which he introduces as a way of resolving conflicts between human interests and non-human interests. In the end, he says, only if vital human interests are at stake can we commit an action which harms the integrity or stability of an ecosystem, right? Only if vital human, and lo and behold, Regan's worse-off principle and his mini-right principles do the same thing, okay? Again, it comes down to vital human needs. And so it's, again, another very strong norm for determining what's right and wrong, okay? The norm, now, we're getting right down to it, okay? Normative theory, this is their answer to the normative question. What is the measure of a morally right, morally wrong action? How do we decide that? That's the normative question. Remember, we keep focusing on these 3 questions. These guys always have this answer. It is fundamentally morally wrong to reduce an animal, in this case, right? If we were just Kantians, we would say it is fundamentally morally wrong to reduce a human being to instrumental status. Regan wants to, he says there's no way to be rational unless we extend that principle out beyond humanity to animals who are subjects of lives. Okay? And he recognizes, though, that if that's the only principle that we have, then we might end up being committed to certain courses of action which are counterintuitive. Okay? Which go against, this basic gut feeling that most of us have. That, golly, humans are, we have deeper obligations to humans. Okay? So, anyway, but these are pretty stringent principles, okay? I just want to focus on the worse off principle. The idea here is that some kinds of animals experience pain, hardship, death, trauma, suffering more deeply, more comprehensively than others, okay? And so, and that means that some animals are worse off by pain, by having to go through those things, pain, suffering, death, right? Some animals are worse off. Okay, that's what that worse off principle means. So, if you are faced with a situation, a real, genuine, real life situation where human vital needs are at stake, right? And you're instrumentalizing a non-human for human vital needs, then perhaps what Regan is arguing is that that's okay. Because if your life is really at stake here, then it's okay for you to instrumentalize the non-human. Why? Because you are going to be worse off by suffering and death than the animal, than the non-human, right? Okay? That's what he means by worse off. So, but let's try to figure out exactly what he's arguing here, though, because he might be arguing something pretty stringent and strong here, but he might also be arguing more simply that wherever we can demonstrate that harvesting a non-human life will save a human life, that may be what he's arguing. Wherever we can demonstrate, then it's okay, right? Wherever we can, and the example I use for that would be harvesting the heart of a chimpanzee, right? And that may be what he's saying, that wherever we can show, let's say you have some really serious blood condition, you just have to eat meat, you have to eat red meat, right? So wherever we can show that that's necessary, that's your vital need is at stake here, then it's going to be okay. for you to instrumentalize a non-human animal. I suspect, though, that his argument is more stringent than that, in fact, and that it's not, we don't have that easy way out, really, with Regan. So let's see. But obviously, some things are going to be just clearly, right? The dolphin killing, remember going back to the Leopoldians and the dolphins in Taiji? The Leopoldians would have to stop and conduct an analysis of all the predators and the relationships. And after the Leopoldians developed an understanding of the predator-prey relationships that those dolphins are part of, right, and the dolphins' role in their marine ecosystem, then the Leopoldians might conclude that that's morally wrong, right? But the Leopoldians would probably also conclude that just a few, if they only want to take a few, then that's okay, nothing wrong with that, They're just, as long as they are not, remember, the Leopoldians don't condemn an action until it harms the whole, right? And harvesting just a few dolphins is not going to harm the whole, okay? So the Leopoldians are not going to condemn that. The Reganites, the Reganists, or whoever they are, the neo-Kantian, deontological, animal rights defenders are going to condemn the harvest of any dolphin at all, right? Any dolphin at all. Because doing so involves the instrumentalization of an animal who's the subject of a life. Dolphins pull on our heartstrings, right? But he would say the same thing about the cow that you had for dinner last night, right? It was morally wrong to instrumentalize the cow, because the cow also is the subject of a life. All right? But point out, but note too, right, that if in fact somehow dolphin killing was vital, really which is what they're claiming, they're making this cultural argument over in Taiji, right? They're claiming that this is a vital part of their culture, and they point to the length of time that they've been doing this for several hundred years apparently, to somehow corroborate their claim that this is vital to their culture, right? And interestingly enough, the Native Americans on the Olympic Peninsula who harvest whales make the same argument that it's vital to their culture. But they are only harvesting 1 or 2, I think, per year. Whereas in Taiji, they're harvesting hundreds. So perhaps, so anyway, there's something to be said for that argument, right? About the vitality of a culture. But it's probably not consistent with industrial scale harvesting of dolphins, right? Anyway.
Right, so Regan, it wouldn't be for primate research, right?
Regan wants to put an end to all animal experimentation.
Right, so...
Now there is a wiggle room perhaps, if you can prove somehow, and how would you do that, I don't know, but if you can somehow convince people that experiment, it would all have to be case by case, right? And if you're doing a case of one specific experiment which you have demonstrated will lead to the saving of a human life, then perhaps Regan might be okay with it.
Okay.
That'd be a very, very rare situation.
Okay, yeah, because you're saying that it's not as easy of an out as it seems, because for primate research with AIDS research, for instance, even though that could save a bunch of human lives, that it's not an easy out to say that their
vital needs are at stake and therefore it's morally okay.
Right, so it's a little bit more constringent than...
I think Regan would... No, and actually Regan might... The epistemological problems are just enormous. I mean, at what point do you say, yes, we now believe this experiment is going to lead to saving a human life? Right? I mean, you never know. At what point, right? I mean, it might have been a long time ago, right? If you think... So, I think that Tom Regan is just going to condemn any kind of experimentation on it. And also, I think, if anything, he would be more concerned about a chimpanzee, because the chimpanzee has a greater cognitive sophistication than some other animals that they use. Right? Interestingly, I guess there is room in Regan's analysis for gradations of moral status, right? But he wants to say that subject of life is just the bottom line, right? You have moral status if you are the actor in your own drama. And evidence of your being the actor in your own drama could just be you go outside to poop, right? or you gather up a few twigs to add to that little area where you like to sleep or something, you know? That's it. It can be very, very minimal. You're not just going on automatic pilot. And that's where this anti-fish prejudice probably comes in, because it seems as though fish are more easy to characterize as going on automatic pilot, right? They're not actually making decisions. I mean, they are making micro decisions, right? If there's warm water, they're going to swim away from it. If there's salmon, right? If there's food over there, they're going to go to it. So they're making these real primitive, but the big decisions that they make about when to turn upstream and where to go and all that, that's all kind of genetically programmed into them. And so Regan might say, well, they're not really subjects of lives. So, because they're just acting on automatic. You know. Anyway, all right. So dolphin slaughter might be morally acceptable under Regan's worse-off principle, but only very, very rare situations. Interestingly, what about shipwrecked humans who have no access to food and water? And one of them, let's say there are 4 or 5 of these shipwrecked humans and have no access to food and water, and one of them has some serious injury. Is it okay to harvest that guy? The one that's seriously injured? Maybe he's going to die anyway, we don't know. But harvest him, you know, and then eat his flesh. Why not? If there's no other food. Well, actually that's happened. And guess what? The people who did that were prosecuted when they arrived back safely at home. No. This old 17th century cases, they were prosecuted for murder. Yeah. And they were convicted of murder. Yes, they should be. You can't just do that. You can't just, come on, man, right? Poor guy, you know, you're all shipwrecked, you're in this together, and all of a sudden one guy's going to just be stabbed to death and then eaten? That's not right. But the penalty for those people who did that their circumstances were taken into account, and they were not harshly punished. But under the law, they were guilty of murder, which again is a good illustration, right, of our very strong notion of rights. Human rights is very, very strong idea, and has been for a long time. You know, anyway. So we might ask, well, is that what we're talking about? Is that the kind of notion of rights that we're talking about when we talk about the rights of a dolphin? It seems as though for Regan, yeah, there's no, right, it's equally strong. So that would be cool if we could get an interspecies court going on, wouldn't it? All those animals that we can communicate with, right? Just get a court, right? And then when we violate their rights, they prosecute us, right? It'd be hard for them to enforce it though, wouldn't it? They'd have to hire us to enforce it, right? Because they can't go on land, right? I mean, they'd have to hire us to be cops. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? Yeah, when I'm done with college, I'm going to go be a member of the Dolphin Bureau of Investigation. The DBI, right, instead of the FBI. And you could have enforcement rights that you can go arrest all those humans who are polluting the, you know, it could be international, right? Get hired by the United Nations, wear some blue helmets on, and then go intervene in Taiji. And just arrest all those people, right? And then bring them to the submarine underwater where the dolphins have their court. That's crazy, isn't it? But logically, that's where we would have to go, isn't it? I mean, if we want to live in an enlightened society, then we have to acknowledge. Well, I'm always puzzled about, well, what do you do with a chimpanzee who knows sign language? What about that? Let's put a chimpanzee who knows sign language on the lifeboat, which is the other example which I'm going to use to illustrate that perhaps Regan's argument is really quite a bit stronger than what I just suggested about, right? One reading is that, look, you got to be a vegetarian, you probably got to be a vegan, you can't even wear leather shoes, you can't support any kind of animal experimentation, right, if you're following Regan. But if you can prove that, for example, harvesting that chimpanzee's heart is going to save your Uncle Bob, right, and give your Uncle Bob, let's say a minimum of another 10 or 20 years, right, 10 or 15 years of healthy, reasonably healthy life, right? That may be what Regan is saying. In that case, right, that's Bob's vital need. Bob needs a heart. Right? And medical science has evolved to the point, let's hypothesize, that we could use the chimpanzee's heart to cure Bob, right? Give him another 10 or 15 years. Your beloved Uncle Bob, right? The radical one that you really like talking to at Thanksgiving. But, you know, like a lot of radical people too, he smoked cigarettes his whole life, he ate the wrong kind of food, he didn't exercise, and now he needs a new heart. Does that matter? What if Bob had nothing to do with his heart disease? Anyway, let's think about that example, right? Would Regan allow that? Okay. Right, I point here that, again, remember, think of these two principles, the worse-off principle and the mini-right principle, as analogous to Collicutt's second-order principles. All right, they both serve to mediate between vital human concerns and vital non-human concerns. All right. So now think of the example of Dave the human with heart disease who needs a heart from Phil the chimp. Okay, and let's apply Regan's worse-off principle. All right, who's going to be worse off from dying? The chimpanzee. Let's assume that the chimpanzee is a laboratory-raised chimpanzee. Nobody's going to go to Africa and kidnap some poor unsuspecting chimpanzee. All right, it's just a chimpanzee that's already been raised up in a lab. So who's going to be worse off when he dies? The chimpanzee or your Uncle Bob?
Bob.
Obviously, right? Because Bob is more cognitively, emotionally, intellectually sophisticated. He experiences death much more intimately and painfully, doesn't he? That's a simple point. Don't overthink anything you learn in a philosophy class. Right? That's not the skill of philosophy. The skill of philosophy is having a bunch of ideas, being broad-minded, and comparing them all, right? Not overthinking little specifics, okay? So, yeah, the basic idea is that because Bob has human loved ones who are going to cry and weep and moan and gnash their teeth and tear out their hair, right? And Bob himself is going to agonize over his impending death, right? Whereas the chimp, he's just going to, do what he does, and it's not going to be a big deal. He's going to have some loved ones who care about him a little bit, right? So the human's going to be worse off, okay? So let's apply the worse off principle. Okay? And what is the result of applying the worse off principle? Do we harvest the chimpanzee? Do we kill Phil and harvest his heart if we're good Reganites?
Yes.
Yes, because vital human needs are at stake. Okay? Perhaps. If that's right, okay, maybe. Maybe the answer is yes. Okay? But maybe the answer is no. And the lifeboat example now is an example that Regan does use. Okay? He uses the lifeboat example. And in this example, there are 4 humans and a dog. All the humans and the dog are roughly 120 pounds. Okay? So they're small humans and the dog is somewhat large. But anyway, there's room for only 4 of these 5 beings. All right, so the question is, which of these beings do we overthrow? What does Regan say? And why? Which of the beings in the boat do we throw over?
Dog.
Throwing over the dog.
Yes, and why?
You can't feel it.
Yeah.
Exactly, because the dog is a lot less worse off by death than the humans. Okay, the vital interest of the humans. Now, what's the difference though between so as far as the lifeboat example goes, we're all in agreement here. Tom Regan, right? And we know what he's saying there because he uses that example himself. But the other example about the chimpanzee is one that I introduced, and he doesn't use this example. And it's really different. There's something basically different, isn't there? About, right? They're very different kinds of moral struggles, aren't they? In the lifeboat, the thinker, the doer, has no choice but to instrumentalize. One of those beings is going to be reduced because one of those beings is going to die. Right? There's no getting around that. One of those beings has to be instrumentalized. All right? Now, in the chimp human, in the Phil and Dave example, can we say that? Are we in a situation where we have to instrumentalize one of those two?
That's almost saying that there are no other options like humans who are organ donors that have similar blood type and genetic material as the human who's dying, they can transplant a human into. They would rather instrumentalize a chimp than use donor programs?
We're just trying to get at the moral theoretical aspect of this.
Sorry.
The difference between the lifeboat example and the chimpanzee heart transplant example is that not instrumentalizing Phil, the chimpanzee, in other words, declining, refusing the operation, even knowing that your Uncle Bob's going to die. Maybe Uncle Bob himself is the guy that's refusing it. But in any event, refusing that operation does not mean that you're instrumentalizing Bob. Okay? Whereas refusing to throw the dog overboard means that you are going to instrumentalize one of those others. You see the difference? Okay? You're letting nature or Bob's poor habits of smoking and, eating the wrong food and develop, right, which is what caused his heart disease. You're letting nature and his illnesses take their course, right? But you're not instrumental. You are not doing anything to instrumentalize Bob, right? And so if this more stringent interpretation of Regan's argument is accurate, then the real moral test has nothing to do with whether or not you're saving a human life. The real moral test has to do with whether or not you're instrumentalizing a living being who is the subject of a life. Okay? And in the chimpanzee human heart example, you're not instrumentalizing. The only instance of instrumentalization is if you do that. If you do that, you will certainly you'll be killing Phil, the chimpanzee, who is a subject of a life, right? And that's the test of wrongness. Okay? And in the alternative, where you simply decline the operation, you are not instrumentalizing anybody, and there's no moral wrongness, right? You guys see that?
Okay.
And so it's a very stringent argument. And he's not saying, he doesn't give us an easy way out. All right? Do you like that more stringent reading?
Huh?
Tell me your name.
Corey.
Corey. Do you like that would be more consistent. That
Right.
reading of Regan would be more amenable to the kind of radical defense of a chimpanzee that your friend would be interested in.
Right. So yeah, don't instrumentalize. If
Yeah,
that's its big
exactly.
Yeah.
And that gets us away from this whole human, oh, well, he's saving a human life, yeah. And at what point does that argument carry the day, right? Does it carry the day for a species? They're endless. The last white rhino, I think. Anyway, northern white rhino. He's guarded 24/7 by soldiers in this country, in the Congo, I think, where he is. Anyway, he's the last one, right? I don't know what they're going to do. He can't breed with anybody. I guess they use his... Anyway, and they already cut out his horn. Have you seen that picture of that guy? It's so shocking, really. But he's out there, he's the last of his kind. But, and he's got these, and his horn has been cut off, and then he has these these soldiers, or these armed people around him, 24/7, protecting him from poachers. Anyway, should we take a break? I think we've, so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that helps.
All right, and that's the more stringent interpretation. Reducing an animal to instrumental status, treating the animal as mere property is morally permissible when it's done for vital human needs. All right, and anyway, I lay that out here, right? One interpretation is that, anyway, well, let's take our break. I don't want to discourage people from taking a break, all right? So just come back in 4 minutes, and we'll continue. Yes, I remember, yes.
And then, did you pass back the returns last time?
Yes, I did. And that reminds me. I didn't shoot that out too. So let's see here. Okay, those are all reading summaries. And, yeah, I have, not only do I have midterms, but I also have, no, I don't. You turned, never mind. Yeah, I think I did grade a bunch more too, didn't I? Yeah, I graded the should trees have standing, which you turned in last Tuesday. So, yeah. Right. Those are in alphabetical order.
Okay.
And then your midterm, oh thanks, is that for, that's okay, that's, and then here are, there's yours. So I do have a few, looks like I have 3 or 4 midterms here. Cameron did very well, he should be eager to receive his. Corey did okay, you're here today. Corey did some. Melanie, get this made.
Wait, what is it, all of this here? Or is it those?
Yeah.
Notice that we're still seeking action norms, really. And, you know, one response to this lifeboat situation is you can't throw anyone overboard, not the dog either, because doing so is just inconsistent with virtue, with personal excellence. So even though, right, and then some people, I mean, profoundly dissatisfied. What do you mean inconsistent with personal? What are you talking about here? We're talking about life here. Some lives are at stake here. We need to make a decision. You need to have an action norm to tell us how to act here. You can't just say it's inconsistent with personal excellence, and therefore you can't do it. But I don't know, you know. I mean, I think people that I admire, like, you know, let's say Uncle Aldo was on the lifeboat. Now, maybe he wouldn't have such a hard time, but I kind of sense he would have a hard time throwing anybody overboard, and he might figure out